Let's say it plain. They didn't take your vote. They made it harder for your vote to matter. And those are not the same thing. Because on paper, everything still looks fair. You can still vote. You can still show up. You can still participate. But what happens after that vote is cast? That is where the shift is. And that is where most people aren't looking. There are certain things people go through, patterns they keep running into, but nobody really stops to explain what's actually happening. Not clearly, not directly. So instead of dressing it up, we're just going to call it what it is. So, let's say it plain. Recently, the Supreme Court made a decision that didn't look loud on the surface, but carries weight underneath it. In a 6-3 ruling, a congressional map in Louisiana was struck down. That map included 2 majority black districts. While that sounds like a technical decision, the shift wasn't just about the map. It was about how challenges like this can be made going forward. Before, you could challenge a map based on its impact. If the outcome showed that voting power was being reduced, that alone could be enough to question it. Now, the focus shifts to intent. Not just what happened, but what lawmakers meant to do. And that distinction is where everything changes. Voting is supposed to be simple. You live in a district, you vote for representation, your vote contributes to outcomes, and those outcomes reflect the people. That's the idea. That's what people are taught. That is what democracy is presented as. Equal voice, equal power, equal impact. And for a long time, people believed that. They believe participation equals influence, that numbers translate into representation, that showing up means something will shift. And on the surface, it still looks like that. But that assumption is where the disconnect begins. Because when you look closer, something doesn't quite line up. Communities exist with large populations, but limited representation. You start noticing outcomes that don't reflect the people that live there. And at first, it's easy to explain away. But over time, the repetition makes it harder to ignore. Even when people vote, even when participation increases, the result doesn't always reflect the input. And that is when it starts to feel off. Not dramatic, but consistent. Voting power, it's not just about voting. It's about structure. And that structure shows up in how districts are drawn. Before a vote ever happens, the lines are already in place. These lines determine who votes together, who gets grouped, who gets separated. So the outcome is influenced before participation even begins. Even if a group makes up a large percentage of the population, that doesn't automatically translate into influence. Because how that population is divided determines how much impact they actually have. You can have numbers without power. Previously, if a system produced unequal outcomes, it could be challenged. Now, the focus moves to intent. Not what did this cause, but what was the intention behind it. This is important because that verbiage changes everything. Because outcomes are visible, intent is not. You can see the result clearly, but proving someone meant for that result to happen is much harder. And in most cases, that intent is never directly stated. And once you see it, you start to notice the pattern. Outcomes can stay the same even when the rules change. Representation can be reduced without removing participation. Power can be adjusted without touching the right to vote itself. And because everything still looks functional, it becomes harder to challenge, harder to prove, harder to stop, harder to explain. Let's slow this down for a second because this part matters. The Voting Rights Acts of 1965 was not created in a vacuum. There was a time when voting wasn't just difficult, it was dangerous. Literacy tests, poll taxes, violence at the polls. People were blocked, intimidated, attacked for trying to vote. So when protections were in place, they were designed to stop both obvious suppression and subtle structural imbalance. Fast forward to now, the methods look a little different. But the conversation feels familiar to many people. Not because everything is the same, but because the patterns feel recognizable. So when something like this happens, the reaction isn't just about policy. It's about what it represents. And mentally, that creates a shift. People begin asking, does my vote still carry the same weight? Is participation still enough? And that doesn't always show up loudly. Sometimes it shows up as quiet doubt, sometimes as distance, and sometimes as people continuing to do life as normal, but seeing things completely differently underneath. Picture this. You wake up tomorrow and everything looks normal. You still have work, you still have school, you still have responsibilities. Your alarm goes off. You check your phone, you move through your routine, just like any other day. But something underneath it all feels different. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. You get dressed, you get in your car, you walk into your workplace, and nothing around you acknowledges what just happened. Conversations are normal, meetings are normal, emails keep coming in, and on the surface, you move the same way you always have. But internally, there's a question sitting there, a quiet one. Did something just shift? You try not to overthink it. You stay focused. You stay professional. You stay on task like you always do. But it's still there because you understand something now that maybe you didn't fully sit with before. The systems don't always have to announce change for change to happen. So now you're moving through your day, just carrying awareness of history, not as something that happened back then, but something that still has influence right now. And that awareness doesn't stop your life. You still perform, you still show up, you still handle all your responsibilities, but it adds weight, a quiet weight. You sit in meetings and part of you is present, But another part of you is observing. You hear conversations about fairness, opportunity, process, and now you're hearing them differently. Not emotionally, but with context. Because you're not just hearing words anymore, you're noticing patterns. You go home at the end of the day, and life continues, family, conversations, plans, but that awareness doesn't leave. It just becomes a part of how you see things, how we see things. And over time, that does something to you. Not in a way that stops you or hinders you, but in a way that changes how you move, how you interpret outcomes, how you approach systems, how you manage expectations. And maybe the most important part is that nothing around you actually adjusts for that weight. You're still expected to function the same, perform the same, respond the same, even though your understanding has shifted. So from the outside, everything looks normal, but internally, something has changed. And if you've never had to carry that, it's hard to see. But once you do see it, you can't really unsee it. Let's say it plain. This isn't about whether people can vote. It's about whether those votes carry equal weight. Because a system doesn't have to remove access to reduce impact. It just has to adjust the structure. Some systems don't remove power. They just redistribute it. They reshape it, redefine it, and reposition it in ways that's not always obvious at first glance. And once you see that clearly, you start understanding the difference between having a voice and having influence. And that difference is where everything changes. And that, my friends, is saying it plain.